Hi, I'm Cameron Emmanuel Burns, reporting for FinTech Futures here at FinovateSpring here in San Diego. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Phil Goldfeder, the CEO of the American Fintech Council. How are you doing today?
I'm very excited to be here. Always excited to talk FinTech.
Awesome. And well, for those who haven't come across the American Fintech Council, could you give us a brief overview of what the organization does?
The American Fintech Council is a trade association that is differentiated from most others, probably three distinct ways. Number one is that we get to represent emerging industries and emerging financial innovators. And we've really found a way to build sort of processes and rules and regulations and work to think about how do you take an industry that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago and really help them grow in so many different ways. So that's number one. Number two is it used to be that you were either on the banking side or on the fintech side. And there was this natural thought that they were going to compete with each other or that one was displacing the other. We've put everybody under one roof. And today our over 130 members are made up of both fintech companies and innovative banks. And number three, we think of ourselves as standards-based in that when you represent and are a trade association that is made up of emerging industries, you want to define yourself long before anybody else defines you, before your competitors can find you, before regulators can define you. You really want to define yourself. And so we think about what is sort of industry best practice, industry best standard to ensure that, number one, you're talking about yourself long before someone else is defining you, and number two is you're setting yourself on a foundation that is solid, that will last for a long time.
Super, thank you. And a bit of a general one here, but how do you expect the role of fintech to develop over the next 5 years?
It's so interesting because I think oftentimes we get the question is how does the industry want fintech to develop? And I think we're thinking about it all wrong. Fintech exists today mostly because consumers are demanding it. You think about the way my father accesses financial services, the way I access my financial services, and the way my kids access their financial services. Today, my parents write a check, give it for my daughter. My daughter gives it to me so I can put it into my bank account and then disperse it to the 6 different apps that she has. And so it's not a question of what the industry is going to do or wants to do, it's meeting consumer demand. And so the way we think about it at the American Fintech Council is that responsible fintech companies are democratizing financial services and stepping in to serve communities that have long been forgotten by traditional finance. Again, I remember going to the bank with my passbook, right? And they would put it through a printer to update my balances. Today, I check my apps 3, 4, 5 times a day to see how my portfolio is doing, to see what my interest rates are at the moment, to see all kinds of things that I think 20, 30, 40 years ago, you couldn't dream of doing that without actually going to meet with your financial advisor.
Super, thanks for that. And so what do you see as the top policy or regulatory priorities facing US fintechs right now?
I love that question. And people are always expecting me to come up and say, oh, we have to focus on broker deposits, or we have to focus on bank fintech partnerships and third-party risk management, or we have to focus on regulation around buy now, pay later. Doing any one of those things would be like sort of you're picking amongst my children, right? Like we are so proud to have a diverse organization. I said well over 100 members at this point, sort of that represents every piece of the fintech ecosystem. The beauty of that is that we have to think a bit more broad. Not that we don't advocate for individual companies and business verticals. We do that every day. We do it in Washington. We do it in states all across the country. I think the one theme though is clarity. Financial services is a very heavily regulated industry. And when fintech steps in, they're not doing it to get around the rules and regulations. Quite the opposite. Responsible companies understand the rules and regulations and are stepping into it. The challenge is when you don't have clarity, you don't know what rules you have to follow. And when you think about, particularly in political times where you're seeing big shifts and big movements in Washington and states across the country, all of a sudden what we once thought to be true in terms of what we have to do for regulatory compliance and consumer protection is sort of flipped on its head. And so for us, we talk a lot about creating clear rules of the road. What do we have to do? How do we have to do it? We're in regulated industries. Our members, our innovative banks, our fintech companies, they're rule followers. They want to. Again, if they're responsible, tell them what to do and how to do it. And I think that's been the biggest challenge, I think, for the last maybe 3 to 5 years. Is sort of, you have the seesaw effect. And when you're trying, you ask any innovator here and any founder, right? you keep pulling away their foundation, right? And they have to restart themselves. And again, unfortunately, when you have such radical regulatory shifts, right, it creates sort of this uncertainty. And so we fight all the time to get that clarity. And I say we work, it doesn't matter to us whether there's a Democrat in the Oval Office or there's a Republican in the Oval Office, whether it's a Democratic state like New York or California or a Republican state like Utah or Kentucky. We want clarity. Yeah. And for us, the more uniform, the more clarity, the better we're able to serve the consumers who need the help.
Absolutely. Well, you're speaking today on a panel about embedded finance. Could you highlight some of the specific areas within embedded finance that you believe offer the biggest revenue opportunities for the financial institutions today?
Yeah, it's a great panel, and I'm so excited because you're going to have some of the most innovative banks in the country who are going to talk about revenue. But as I mentioned as I mentioned earlier, and I say this all the time, is that we always want to focus about how do you grow a company, right? There's sort of, especially when you're in the government side, the regulatory side, we spend a lot of time in Washington and in state capitals. There's always that question of, are we allowed to talk about making money, right? At the end of the day, these are businesses, right? They're trying to grow. They're trying to grow, by the way, so they can hire and grow the workforce and evolve financial ecosystems. And so, sometimes, you oftentimes find yourself not talking about how much money you're making or for the ability to make money. And so I'm going to change the question around, and it's what we're going to talk about on the panel. So you're getting a sneak preview right now, in that it's not just about how does a company make money. It's more about how do you evolve as a business model. And I think the biggest challenge you're seeing today in the country, community banks all across the country are closing at the fastest clip in history. And so inevitably, consumers who were once utilizing those community banks are now finding themselves sort of in what we call banking deserts or don't have the accessibility. FinTech is filling that void. So there's two problems that need to be solved. Number one is how do you prevent community banks from closing down, right? And so the answer I think that we all know here, responsible innovation. Find partners, find mechanisms, find ways to embrace innovation in your bank to ultimately enable the service. The challenge is change is hard. Change is hard when it's about regulation, and change is hard when you have a traditional business model. And so we're going to talk about how do you grow, but it's really about community banks, how do you survive as a community bank by embracing innovation and then thinking about how you can grow. Again, I say this a lot, not just because community banks need to grow. They're not growing for growth's sake. They're growing, number one, so they can continue to drive the economy, and number two is serve the consumers that historically were utilizing financial services in a traditional way, who today want it on their phone and want more innovative solutions.
Super, thank you for that. And kind of building on that, in your view, how can traditional banks and fintechs work more closely together to unlock the full potential of embedded finance?
I love that question because it goes back to the core of what the American Fintech Council stands for, right? Bringing everybody together. Again, it's not too long ago where there was a thought that fintechs are going to displace banks and that their goal was to put banks out of business. Little did many people know that all of those fintechs were partnered with banks, right? Today, it's growing more and more. We estimate there's probably about 225 community banks out of about 5,000 across the country that are playing in this space, and I should be careful playing in the space. They're acting responsibly in terms of their embracing of innovation and growing the embedded finance ecosystem. I think we need to see that continue to grow. What I have found fascinating today, within the American Fintech Council, we have almost 40 community banks of different sizes, different regulators within the association. And oftentimes you'll find in associations, you see a bit of a competitive spirit. Here it's not. I mean, I find that oftentimes you're seeing general counsels come together to talk. What are you struggling with? What are you struggling with? Chief compliance officers from competitive banks, in theory, who should not be talking, right? Because you want to get that competitive advantage, and that's not what you're seeing here. And that's also part of what's exciting for us, is that when you represent emerging industries, I think there is a collective desire to see the entire ecosystem grow and the entire ecosystem be successful. And I think we all recognize there's a lot of consumers who need the service. I think we haven't solved the problem of financial accessibility today. And that's kind of where the American Fintech Council comes in to try and, where there are those divides, to bridge those divides, put people together and find ways to make sure that there is clarity around the policy and the regulatory, so we can collectively build a future of finance that we can be proud of.
Super, thank you. And just finally, can you share with us any new developments at the American Fintech Council?
We're growing at a a very fast pace, we are always thinking about how do we add more value to our members, right? And so I think, we think of ourselves much like our fintech companies in that you want to grow, but you want to make sure that you maintain your culture, you maintain that spirit that enabled you to get to where you are. And so I think we find ourselves now at kind of an inflection point where we do not want to lose focus on what got us to where we are. And so while we're growing in our membership, we're thinking nonstop, how do we continue to add value to our members who are already here? There's a great Verizon commercial, right? We don't want to just offer new phones to new customers. We want to make sure we take care of our existing customers. And I think it's an interesting example that I think we have taken upon ourselves as well. It's not just about how do I continue to woo new people through our front door. When you do good work, they're going to come. I don't have to worry about wooing them through the front door because we're doing really great work. Literally nonstop, and I say this, credit to my team, finding new ways to add additional value to the entire company and make sure that we're giving them the tools and the resources they need to be successful.
Super. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Phil. It's been excellent speaking to you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and good luck with your panel later.
Thank you. I'm very excited. Make sure you come and cheer.
Awesome. Thank you very much.